In this lesson, we're going to set up our data sources in Google Sheets with the help of Supermetrics. So we're going to pull the data from Facebook ads and Google Analytics and then prepare it so it's ready to be used as a source within Google Data Studio. Now, all and more coming up right after this. Welcome back to this course. So in this lesson, we're going to prepare our data sources in Google Sheets. Now, why do we go the route of Google Sheets as a source rather than all the other data connectors that are available within Data Studio? Well, there are multiple advantages, but the first reason being that Google Data Studio doesn't have a connector for Facebook ads yet. I don't know if they're gonna implement it at some point. I hope so, but it's a Google product, so maybe they're gonna leave themselves some time with the Facebook ads. But there's actually a tool that we can use in order to pull the data in, and that is Google Sheets in the combination with Supermetrics. Now, Supermetrics is a third-party tool, an add-on that you can install to your Google Sheets account, and then you can pull data in from various sources. They have many more data connectors than even Google Data Studio has, and it's a very versatile tool, and we'll get into that in this lesson, but that's not the only reason. Google Sheets gives us the opportunity to work with our raw data that we get from the tool, like Facebook ads or Google Analytics, before we then import it. We can actually change the data around, we can clean it up, and most importantly, we can combine data sources. So that's not possible within Google Data Studio itself, to combine different data sources and then calculate metrics from that. So really, with a sheet, we have much greater control about the data that actually goes into our dashboard. And if we run into any issues, we can investigate our data sources first and find out the error there. And that's really why I love using Google Sheets as this bridge between our raw data that comes from the tool and Google Data Studio that we will use for our visualization. All right, enough said. We got still lots to cover in order to make this work. So let's dive into today's lesson. All right, we'll start out with a new Google Sheet, and let's think about what we actually need to make this dashboard work. We need our metrics and dimensions. Now, just to recap, metrics are basically the numbers that you will have in your table later on, and the dimensions are the different properties that you want to divide your data by. In a table, metrics would be represented by the different rows here, and the metrics that would be in those rows, and the dimensions would be on top and represent the different columns. That's important to think about, so we pull the data correctly. Next up, where do we pull the data from? Let's go through a little bit of an exercise here. Let's look at these metrics and decide where we would get them from. And the impressions would come from Facebook, the clicks as well from Facebook. Then the CTR would actually be calculated. So this will be a calculated metric. The ad spend as well from Facebook, the CPC as well calculated, as well as the CPO. Then we have the revenue, which would actually come from Google Analytics, and the conversions also from Google Analytics. Now, this is actually an attribution topic here. If you trust more the attribution of Google Analytics, then you want to pull that into your dashboard, and we will do this in our example. Next up, the return on ad spend, which is also calculated at the end. The ad budget, which will be put in manually, as well as the target CPO and the target CPC. So now we have a good overview of what metric comes from where and what data we have to pull. Let's talk briefly about the dimensions, because dimensions are the different columns that we want to pull. Now, these are obviously heavily based on our Facebook campaign. We have our date, campaign name, ad set, and ad name. But as we have seen, we want to also pull data from our Google Analytics account. Now, how would that be represented in Google Analytics? We may have the date available, but not the campaign name, ad set, and ad name, at least by default in Google Analytics. And that's why we need to actually connect both tools together in order to have all these dimensions in both tools. And that is done through UTM Parameters. Now, if you're not familiar with UTM Parameters, we have another video on that. But basically, you need to make sure that when you input your campaigns into Facebook, you need to be clear on the campaign name, campaign content, and campaign term that you would choose beforehand. Then you can go ahead and tag your link. So in this sheet, we have a link that we prepared in order for our campaigns to be tagged correctly. And then when the user clicks on that link or goes to that URL, he will be automatically registered in Google Analytics with these campaign parameters. So make sure in Facebook in your ads campaign that your campaign name, your ad set name, and your ad name actually is tagged up correctly. So there's an option for that, which is called UTM Parameters. You need to have these UTM parameters attached to your link in order for Google Analytics to register this correctly. So once the user clicks on the link, it will be registered in Google Analytics itself. So once you go to your source medium reports, we have here Facebook CPC, and then we would have our campaign name. So let's put that in as a secondary dimension. This is called campaign in Google Analytics. Then we would have our ad content, which is the UTM content parameter. So here we have interest brands. And we would need to have our keyword, which is our UTM term that we also fill with these parameters. So again, you need to make sure you tag them up correctly and send the user to the right link in order for this data that we want to break our metrics down by is available also in Google Analytics. So this actually only works if we have these dimensions in both Google Analytics and Facebook. Now in Facebook, these might be called date, campaign name, ad set, and ad name. In Google Analytics itself, these would be called date, campaign, ad content, and keyword. Different naming convention, but essentially we should get the same data in Facebook when we query for this than in Google Analytics for these different parameters. So be sure you have the same data so you can connect it in your Google Sheets later on. All right, now that we are clear on what we need to pull from where with what dimensions, let's go ahead and prepare our data sources. I will open up a new sheet here and call this Facebook data. And a second sheet called Google Analytics data. Now we can go ahead and pull our data with the help of Supermetrics. Now, if you're not familiar with Supermetrics, you can actually install it by going under the add-ons and go to Get Add-ons and simply enter Supermetrics, and you can install it to your account. Now, the capabilities we will use within Supermetrics are a paid feature, so you would need to upgrade your account, but for anybody who's trying this out new, can use the pro features for 30 days. So once you have it installed, you can go to add-ons and then under Supermetrics, launch the sidebar. And now you'll be able to configure your query. All right, first up, we'll choose our data source. Now, Supermetrics has many data sources available, and therefore it is more powerful than what the built-in capabilities of Google Data Studio actually provide. So you can pull in a host of other data into your dashboard if you choose so. We will go obviously with our Facebook ads account. Now we need to enter our Facebook details. So you need to go through the process of registering this with Supermetrics so it can pull the data into your account. Once you have that, you can choose your account and then select the account. If you have multiple accounts under your login, then you can choose your different data sources and different accounts that you want to select. And we go on to actual date selection. Now, how much data should be pulled here? There are different options like today, yesterday, the month to date options, the year to date options, but also custom date ranges. Now, if you want your dashboard to be kept up to date and periodically be updated, then you might want to use the last days or weeks feature. because that will ensure that your dashboard will always update itself with the available data to that day. Now we'll be looking back for 1 month, so let's go with this last month option, and we want to go back just the last 1 month. You can click including this month or just the last month, so we will just go with the last month. You can even choose a comparing option to the last year. That's something we won't do for our data export. And then we'll get to the different metrics and dimensions. I'm just going to get rid of the last data we pulled here and start out new. Again, what do we want to pull? Let's go back here. We saw we wanted to pull our impressions, clicks, and ad spend. So let's just enter that here. Impressions, and it gives us a quick overview on the available metrics. So we will go with impressions and not social impressions or the frequency. We want to get our clicks, so put in our clicks. Now there are different clicks actually, and if you go with the all option, this will also count your social interactions like the like button on your ad. So we just want to have the link clicks that actually lead to our actual page. And we want to have our ad spend. So we'll just query for our spend. So here we have the amount spent. That should do it. Let's go ahead and choose our split by option. And these are all about the different splits we want to have in our rows, but also our dimensions that we want to pull in. And this is where our different dimensions come in. So let's go ahead and pull in the date, the campaign name, the ad set, actually called ad set name, and the actual ad name. So here we go. Now we have that in order, but there is a restriction on the number of rows that you can pull in. So if you have a lot of data, you might need to split that up into multiple data exports in order to make this work. For our case, this will actually do. We can also use the sorting, but this is mostly done by date. Let's just click on the date. And we don't have to split by any kind of columns. You'll see how the data export will look in a second. We also don't need to choose any kind of filtering. Now this would be an option that is more helpful in our Google Analytics export, as we will see in a second. But if you wanted to filter out certain campaigns, you could do this here as well. And then we'll get to the options, and those are really important because we are preparing our data for Google Data Studio. So the important options you need to tick is the format results for Google Data Studio. Also, show all time values is an important option in order to ensure that your data stays consistent throughout you updating the data as well. So let's keep that turned on. Now before I start this data export, we want to go to the right sheet again and the right column, and let's click on Get That Table. All right, so here we go. This should be our data. Now this data is actually a bit of dummy data that I have loaded up here. In reality, you would probably have some holes in your data and need to figure out whether these should be taken into account for your Facebook ads dashboard. But since we don't have much data in our Facebook account, I still wanted to take the opportunity to show this off correctly. So now we have this data in here. First of all, we see here, these are our dates, and then we have our campaign name, our ad set, and our ad name, and the different impression clicks and the amount that was spent on these clicks. So I think you can also already see that you could calculate, for example, the cost per click by dividing these two numbers. Now there's a lot of data in here because this is actually just the first campaign. If we go down, we see that here comes the next campaign. Here's the next campaign. We have different ad sets and we have different ads within those ad sets. So this amounts to a lot of data, but this is the raw data that then Google Data Studio will take in order to do and visualize our analysis. So this worked out fine. Let's go ahead and go over to our Google data sheet. And here we are gonna pull data from Google Analytics. So again, we'll go through the steps of choosing our data source, selecting our metrics. In our case, that would be transaction and the transaction revenue. And then we want to split that by the rows of date again. And again, now if you go back and look at our Google Analytics campaign values that need to match up with the Facebook data, we'll go with campaign name. This would be campaign, the ad content, and the keyword. And then we can choose how many rows we want to fetch. Again, I'm going with the maximum right here. I don't need to split that data. Now, I only want to actually pull data that comes from Facebook. So I could choose a segment that I have pre-built in Google Analytics, but we didn't do that. So I will just go with the filter option here, and I can add a filter. And as we looked at our Google Analytics report, we can just use the source medium depending on how you have marked up your UTM parameters. And we can say that our source is Facebook and our medium was CPC. So we only pull the data from this source. I hope that makes sense. In the next option, we can actually make sure that, again, we want to prepare our data for Google Data Studio. And there's another option right here that can try to avoid Google's data sampling. Now, if you don't know about sampling in Google Analytics, it's basically a way for Google Analytics to do the computation of the metrics faster by leaving out some values of your raw data set. When you export the data via the reporting API, you can actually avoid data sampling, even though you are not on a premium account, by pulling a small data set and doing multiple of these exports in order to get clean and raw data that is not sampled. So this is something that Supermetrics can do. It might take a little bit longer, but it's worth it, so you get actual clean and unsampled data. We're also gonna turn our show all time values again on, and we are ready to go. Let's go back to our data sheet and get that data. So here we go. We have successfully pulled the data in, the transaction and the transaction revenue. And you can also see that the convention up here, the dimensions have changed, but it's basically the same data that we have pulled in our Facebook export as well. So this data needs to match up in order for us to be able to aggregate both of these sheets together. So you need to have both data points in order to be able to use both of these metrics within Google Data Studio later on. Now the next step is to actually combine the data, because in Google Data Studio we can only use one sheet within a Google spreadsheet as a data source, and we wouldn't be able to do any kind of calculated metrics that are spanning over two separate data sources within Google Data Studio. So we need to aggregate the data. So let's go ahead and build a new data sheet, which we'll call Facebook plus GA. And let's do some Google spreadsheet work. Let's close our Supermetrics panel here and combine this data. Now, first of all, I want to pull in this Facebook data sheet. We could do this several ways. The form that I actually prefer would be to use query functions. Now, if you don't know what query functions are, they're a bit more complicated, but there's great material by David from Coding is for Losers or by Ben Collins that we'll link up in the description below as well. So right now I'm gonna write a little formula, a query formula that pulls in the data from the Facebook sheet. With a select statement, this is mostly the query language of SQL. So if you're familiar with that, you can use it right away. So now we have the data in here and it's automatically updated if we have any kind of changes in the Facebook data. And now we want to be able to import our transaction and revenue values here. So I'm going to just copy this over. And now we need to match it up between our two sheets. Now it might be that the data we see in Facebook and Google Analytics is not in the right order when we pulled it from Facebook than from Google Analytics. So we need to make sure that we are choosing the right row here in order to pull the right date and the right campaign and the right ad set and the right ad name into our aggregate sheet here. And there are different formulas again to do this. A lot of people use something like an index match, but it gets really, really complicated. Not that my solution is less complicated, but I again use the query function in order to query the right transactions here. So I'm going to start out by importing our query and choosing first of all the data set. So our data set would be inside of the GA sheet without the header here. I'm just gonna mark this here and extend that would be 990. All right. And now it pulls all the data from this sheet. Now that's something we don't want. So we input a query. So in our case, that would be, we only want to select the column. Let's see which column it is. E. That should be, let's go up here, the transaction. So select only column E. And we just get the different transactions. Now, these actually need to be matched up to the actual campaign name, ad set, ad name, and the date. So there's another formula I use here. I'm not going to bore you with the details. So this is the actual formula, but really what it does, it just compares, first of all, the date range with the date that we have on the other sheet. So A should equal this A2 right here. Our B column should be the same as this column, our C column, our D column, and so on. That will be compared to our GA data sheet, and then if there's a match, it will pull in our transactions. So let's see what it does. It actually only shows the transactions for this actual field. Now if I double click right here, it should pull that formula down to the bottom. Unfortunately, I forgot something. I actually need to make this fixed. So let's do that. Enter here. Double click again. And now we get all our different data points in here. Now you saw that there were some that were missing actually. And it might be that there was no traffic actually registered by Google Analytics. So these would need to be 0. Now we get an error because I can't find this actually in the GA data sheet. So we're just gonna change our query here and put an if statement and say if there's an error, if error, we can fill this with a 0. All right. So let's correct that. We could also put that onto the whole column here, but I won't do that. Now I'm going to do the same thing for the transaction revenue. So I'm just going to copy this formula, input that here, but this time I want to select the column F from our GA data sheet. Let's put that if error statement in front of it as well. And double click to fill the other rows out. It'll take a while, but we get it all in. And now we have the different transactions and the different transaction amounts matched up to our different campaigns, ad groups, and ad sets. So this data would be now ready to be imported into our Google Data Studio account. Before we go on to the next lesson, we can actually, with the help of Supermetrics, schedule this all. So under Supermetrics, we also have a schedule and refresh emailing option that lets you configure when you want your queries to be updated. So under this action, we can say that we want to refresh this hourly. If we look at our dashboard very often, I would say daily is enough. Let's go with the daily option. When do you want to process that? That seems fine, 2 o'clock at night. Let's store this trigger. And now our data will be kept up to date by refreshing our queries that we have configured in Supermetrics every day at 2 a.m. So now that we have our combined sheet ready, we can start with importing that data into Google Data Studio, which we'll do in the next lesson. Alright, so now we have our data prepared in Sheets. That was a bit more work than you might expect, but it ensures really that we understand the data that is underlying our visualizations later on and can fix any error. Now you can take a look at the data sheet that we have just built in the description below. I will link it up there. And this is a sheet that we will utilize to build our dashboard in the next lesson. So if that's already available, you can click on that video over there. Or if you haven't yet, then consider subscribing down there, because we'll bring you new lessons just like these every week. Now, my name is Julian. See you in the next lesson.